Before Helen of Troy, before Clytemnestra and her knife of vengeance, before Circe and her spells, there was Medea. She was not remembered for beauty, nor for war, but for something far more complex, the power of choice. In the mythic imagination of Greece, Medea is not merely a character, she is a phenomenon. A living symbol of love transformed into vengeance, of loyalty turned into fire. If Helen's story began a war between kingdoms, Medea's began a war within the human heart, between reason and desire, between devotion and the instinct to destroy what betrays us. Her origins, like all great myths, are both historical and symbolic. Born the granddaughter of Helios, the sun god, Medea inherited more than divine blood. She inherited illumination. But this was not a gentle light. It was the kind that exposes, that burns away illusion. Through her lineage, she became something rare in ancient storytelling. A woman defined not by beauty or submission, but by intelligence and will. In the ancient texts, from Apollonius Rhodius's Argonautica to Euripides's Medea, she emerges as an enigma, never purely virtuous, never wholly wicked. She is the paradox of creation and destruction made flesh, a woman who saves and kills, loves and punishes, often in the same breath. And that duality is what makes her unforgettable. Within the patriarchal world of classical Greece, Medea was something dangerous, a woman who thought. She saw through manipulation, through divine decrees and social constraints. When betrayed, she did not choose tears, the acceptable currency of feminine suffering, but fire. And in Greek cosmology, fire is not only a symbol of rage, but of nous, divine intelligence, the force that transforms and transcends. By choosing fire, Medea refused to remain victim. She became the one who acts, who decides, who changes the course of the story. Medea inaugurates a new archetype in mythology, the woman as a conscious moral agent. No longer a pawn of gods or men, she becomes a force of her own. And that is why the world feared her. They called her witch, murderer, monster. Not merely for what she did, but because she dared to do. In Euripides's play, Medea herself declares, "Of all creatures that have breath and intellect, we women are the most wretched." And yet, she transcends that wretchedness. She turns grief into knowledge, humiliation into power. Medea's genius is not her magic. It is her understanding that to act, even in ruin, is still to own one's fate. Thus, when people speak her name, they are not speaking of a villain or a victim, but of a moral threshold. That invisible line where justice becomes vengeance and love becomes annihilation. Medea stands at that line, fully aware of what it costs to cross it. Before Helen and the war's men fought for beauty, there was a woman who made the world tremble not because of how she looked, but because of how she thought. She did not beg to be loved. She demanded the right to choose. And when love betrayed her, she did not cry. She burned. To understand Medea, one must begin at the edge of the known world, Colchis. It was a land whispered about by Greek sailors, half remembered in wine-soaked songs, painted in the colors of mystery and menace. To the Greeks, Colchis was a shadow beyond civilization, a place where the wild gods still walked in the open. To Medea, it was home. The air there smelled of resin and salt, the forests thick with herbs that could heal or kill depending on the touch that gathered them. In the heart of this land stood her father's palace, King Aeetes, a man whose temper was as legendary as his treasures. Her mother, Medea, was said to be an Oceanid, one of the daughters of Oceanus, titan of the encircling sea. Yet it was her father's lineage that mattered most, for Aeetes was the son of Helios, the god of the sun. And so through him, Medea carried the blood of fire itself. That heritage mattered. In a world that divided gods from mortals, Medea was neither and both, a child of dawn. From her earliest years, she lived between two orders, the rational and the divine. She learned the speech of humans and the secrets of the earth. In Colchis, magic was not trickery. It was knowledge. The same herbs that seasoned bread could halt a heartbeat. The same smoke that carried prayer could blur the memory of grief. And in the quiet of her father's halls, Medea studied all of it. She was not reckless. Even as a child, she listened more than she spoke. She was known to watch people the way healers watch the color drain from a wound, with precision, with curiosity, with something dangerously close to understanding. The Greeks would later call her Pharmakeia, a sorceress, but to her own people she was simply learned. The kind of woman who knew the names of things, and thus could change them. Those who wrote of her beauty often missed the point. Medea was not beautiful in the way of goddesses sculpted from marble. Golden curls, soft eyes, and smiles meant to soothe men's fears. Her beauty was an act of defiance, dark hair heavy as oil, eyes deep and unreadable like the Black Sea itself, a stillness that carried weight. When she entered a room, the air shifted. Not because men desired her, but because they weren't sure if they should bow or run. Even her clothing betrayed her otherness. She wore robes embroidered with symbols no Athenian could interpret, pendants shaped like serpents and suns, patterns that spoke of another world. When she walked through Greek retellings, she was always the foreigner, the Eastern witch, the stranger who brought with her a wisdom that could not be tamed. But long before the poets painted her as a monster, Medea was a student of balance. She understood the space between healing and harm, loyalty and vengeance, restraint and release. She saw how power, when controlled, could preserve life, and how, when provoked, it could destroy. In that understanding, she became dangerous. Not because she sought chaos, but because she understood order too well. In Colchis, her teachers were not priests, but time, patience, and silence. And it was in that silence that she learned the first rule of her craft. That power begins not with words or potions, but with observation. To know is to command. The Greeks feared Colchis because it stood outside their maps, beyond their temples, untouched by their logic. They feared Medea for the same reason. She was proof that there were other kinds of knowledge, the kind born not from Olympus, but from the soil. The kind that whispers rather than shouts. The kind that can kill as easily as it can cure. In the centuries to come, the poets would call her a witch. But in the language of her homeland, Medea was something far older and far truer. A daughter of the sun, who learned that even light can burn. The Greeks would later call it witchcraft, Pharmakeia, a word that meant both remedy and poison, depending on the mouth that spoke it. But for Medea, it was not sorcery. It was science. It was the language of transformation, the ancient grammar of blood and soil. She did not conjure fire from air or whisper storms into being. Her power was subtler, slower, more intimate. She knew that true magic was not spectacle, it was precision. In the gardens of Colchis, she learned to speak to plants the way others prayed to gods. She would press a leaf between her fingers, feel its breath, its bitterness, and know whether it would heal or kill. Nightshade, yarrow, henbane, each one a fragment of the world's hidden alphabet, and when combined, they told stories the uninitiated could never read. Medea did not wave her hands and command the elements. She listened. She understood that nature obeyed those who paid attention. Her study was not without danger. She once said, or so the poets claimed, that the difference between medicine and murder was a single drop. That line, that thin edge between life and death, fascinated her. Not because she wished to cross it, but because she wished to master it. To understand how fragile the order of things truly was. When the Greeks wrote of her later, they imagined spectacle, fog and fire, shadows twisting into beasts. But those were metaphors for something greater, the kind of power that begins with knowledge and ends with belief. Medea understood that the human mind is its own battlefield. Fear is the first spell, belief the second. Once a man believed in her magic, he was already under it. There is a kind of quiet terror in this understanding, for it meant that her influence did not depend on thunder or divine intervention. It lived in the way she looked at someone, the way her silence lingered after a question. Her greatest spells were not words. They were choices. A pause, a gesture, a refusal to react when others expected her to. In her father's court, this made her both invaluable and feared. Diplomats came and left whispering that Aedes' daughter could read a man's soul as easily as she could mix a draft. They were not wrong. Medea did not see people as good or evil. She saw them as patterns, as predictable systems waiting to reveal their weaknesses. It is said that she could look into a man's eyes and see not who he was, but what he would do next. And yet, she was not cruel. Cruelty, after all, is impulsive. Medea was deliberate. She did not act until she had calculated every outcome, traced every path to its end. Her stillness was her strategy. She learned early that patience was more potent than any charm, and silence more dangerous than accusation. In the evenings, she would watch the sun set over the Black Sea, its light bleeding into the waves like molten copper. Perhaps she wondered if that was what her power truly was, the inheritance of a god who burns so brightly that he blinds those who look too long. The fire of Helios ran through her veins, but it was tempered by shadow. She knew both the warmth of life and the chill of its undoing. It was this duality, healer and harbinger, daughter and exile, lover and destroyer, that made her unforgettable. In every age, the women who know too much have been feared. Medea was the first to embody that fear. She was knowledge made flesh, wisdom that refused to be silent. And when the poets sang of her centuries later, they called her a witch. But they forgot that witch was once another word for woman who knows. When Jason came to Colchis, he did not come as a conqueror. He came as a promise. A man of noble lineage, polished charm, and the sort of confidence that makes others mistake ambition for destiny. The ship he sailed, the Argo, was carved from sacred oak and filled with names that would echo through myth: Heracles, Orpheus, Castor, and Pollux. Heroes who sought the golden fleece, the shining symbol of divine favor. But for all their glory, not one of them could have taken it without her. Jason arrived like a storm pretending to be a breeze. He stood before King Aeetes, asking for what was not his, the fleece, a relic bound in divine magic and guarded by a sleepless dragon. The court laughed, as men often do when they mistake courage for foolishness. But somewhere in the silence that followed, Medea was watching. Some said it was Aphrodite who struck her heart, at the request of Hera, who favored Jason's quest. Others said it was curiosity, that quiet, dangerous curiosity of a mind too sharp to be content with stillness. Whatever it was, something in her shifted. Her pulse, her breath, the steady rhythm of her restraint. All of it changed the moment she saw him. Jason's trials were impossible by design. To yoke fire-breathing bulls, to plow a field of iron, to sow dragons' teeth into the earth and survive the army of warriors that would rise from them. Each task was meant to end in death. And yet Medea made sure he lived. She gave him a salve to guard his flesh from flame. She whispered to him the secret of the earthborn soldiers, that if he cast a stone among them, they would turn on each other. Her words became his salvation. Her mind, his only shield. In choosing to help him, she betrayed everything else. Her father, her people, her gods. But that is the nature of choice. It demands a sacrifice. And Medea, who had always studied the cost of things, paid it willingly. For the first time, she acted not out of calculation, but devotion. Love for Medea was never soft. It was fire disguised as warmth. It was a test of endurance. Jason saw in her what all men see when they find something they cannot control, usefulness wrapped in mystery. But he did not yet understand that the same woman who saved his life would one day take it apart piece by piece. When the dragon guarded the tree of gold, Medea came to it in silence. Some say she sang a lullaby. Others claim she brewed a potion that lulled it to sleep. Either way, it obeyed her, the daughter of Helios, the master of serpents and shadows. Jason took the fleece as if it were destiny, but it was Medea who made destiny possible. Their escape was not a triumph. It was a wound. Aeetes' ships pursued them across the dark waters, and Medea, pressed between fear and devotion, made a choice that would stain her soul forever. Her brother, Apsyrtus, had followed in the fleet. In some tellings he was a soldier, in others still a child. In every version, Medea kills him. She cuts him to pieces and casts his limbs into the sea, not from hatred, but from strategy. She knew her father would stop to gather them. She knew grief would slow him, and in that pause Jason escaped. The waves closed over the fragments of a brother's body, and the Black Sea turned red beneath the moon. From that moment, Medea ceased to belong to Colchis. The land of her birth was behind her, the man she loved before her, and the gods above her watched in silence. She had crossed every border, between family and betrayal, between salvation and sin. She had entered the realm where love and ruin become one and the same. In the stories that followed, poets would call her monstrous. But perhaps the truth is simpler. Medea was never a monster. She was the price of a man's ambition, paid in full. The sea that carried them away from Colchis was calm only on its surface. Beneath it, blood and prophecy swirled together like smoke in water. Jason and the Argonauts were hailed as heroes when they reached Iolcus, their ship gleaming with divine triumph. They brought home the golden fleece, symbol of kingship, proof of favor from the gods. Yet among them stood Medea, foreign, silent, and necessary. Her name was not sung in their songs, though without her none would have lived to return. She walked beside Jason not as a bride, but as an unspoken truth, the shadow that trails every legend. For while Jason's quest had ended, hers had only begun. King Helios, who had usurped Jason's father's throne, was not moved by heroism. He refused to relinquish his power, and Jason, ever the dreamer without a plan, turned once again to Medea. It was always Medea who solved the impossible. It was always her mind that moved in places his could not. She devised a demonstration for the king's daughters, one that blurred the line between miracle and deception. Before their eyes, she slaughtered an old ram, boiled its flesh with herbs, and drew from the cauldron a newborn lamb, white, alive, and bleating. The princesses gasped, their wonder eclipsing their reason. Medea's voice was gentle, her hands steady as she placed the blade into their palms. "Do as I have done," she whispered, "and your father will be young again." They obeyed. And when they had finished, Peleus lay lifeless, boiled alive by the hands of his own blood. The daughters screamed for their miracle to return. But there was no rebirth, no second rising, only silence. Medea had never promised resurrection. She had promised transformation, and sometimes transformation demands an ending. Jason did not hold the knife, but the stain was his. The people whispered of witchcraft, of murder, of a throne won by deceit. The songs that had once praised him turned to ashes in their throats.
For the bride.
He and Medea were driven out. Their triumph turned to exile. They fled to Corinth, a city of marble and restraint, ruled by King Creon. There, at last, the storm seemed to settle. They were given shelter, a home, a measure of peace. Medea bore him children, and for a time the fire dimmed. The woman who had lulled dragons and slain kings became a mother. The witch became quiet. But peace for Medea was a fragile thing. The silence that once empowered her now felt like a prison. Jason, restless as ever, began to chafe against the weight of his past. He looked upon Corinth's palace, upon its young princess Glaus, and saw an opportunity. Marriage to her would secure his place in the city. Protect their sons and perhaps, he told himself, redeem him in the eyes of the gods. In this rationalization lay his greatest illusion, that Medea, who had given him everything, would simply fade. That she would accept erasure as easily as he accepted betrayal. Jason mistook her silence for surrender, her stillness for peace. He forgot the first rule of fire. What does not burn, waits.
Medea!
For Medea, the years in Corinth had been years of observation. She had watched her husband rise on the ruins of her own sacrifices. She had watched him distance himself from the blood that bought his glory. She had watched him trade devotion for diplomacy. When he announced his intent to wed Glausa, Medea did not scream. She did not plead. She simply nodded and began to plan. There is a peculiar kind of rage born not from hatred but from comprehension. Medea's fury was not wild. It was deliberate. Every thought, every memory, every buried wound became a thread she wove into her final act. She would not only destroy Jason's new life, she would make him understand what it meant to lose everything that defined him. In the eyes of Corinth, she was already an outsider, a foreign witch tolerated only by the king's mercy. In Jason's eyes, she was now an inconvenience, But Medea had learned the oldest lesson of her craft, that patience is the sharpest blade. Soon, that blade would find its mark. By the time the whispers reached Creon's court, the damage had already been done. Corinth's courtiers spoke of a foreign woman with eyes too calm, of silks that carried the scent of strange herbs, of a queen who smiled without warmth. Medea's name was no longer spoken with awe but with unease, a dangerous relic from a story that had gone too far. Jason, ever skilled at survival, distanced himself from her. He spoke to the king of alliances, of peace, of practical futures. Glauca, Creon's daughter, was young, unblemished by scandal, and easily moved by the promise of romance. Jason told himself it was politics. Medea knew it was cowardice. Her life in Corinth had been one long performance. The same people who once feared her power now dismissed her as a ghost of another world. But ghosts have patience. They know how to wait for the right haunting. Medea did not argue when Jason announced his engagement. She did not plead when Creon decreed her exile. Instead, she asked for one more day. One final day before she and her sons would leave Corinth forever. Creon, misreading composure as compliance, agreed. That was his first mistake. In her chamber, Medea prepared her last gift. The robe was woven with threads she had blessed and cursed in equal measure, infused with her craft's most elegant paradox, beauty that kills. The crown glimmered with gold dust, polished to perfection. To Glauca, they would seem tokens of reconciliation, a final gesture from a humbled queen. To Medea, they were the purest expression of her truth, that everything beautiful carries a hidden cost. When the gifts arrived at the palace, Glauca accepted them with innocent delight. She placed the crown upon her hair, the robe upon her shoulders, and smiled into the mirror. The silk clung to her like warmth at first, then like fever. The gold began to smoke, then flame. The servants' screams filled the halls as the princess writhed, the crown melting into her scalp. Creon ran to her, tried to tear the fabric away, and was consumed beside her. In moments, the palace of Corinth became a pyre. Outside, the people spoke of divine punishment. Inside, Medea stood in the quiet of her house, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and iron. The deed was done. Yet it was not enough. Jason still lived, and so did the future he had built upon her ruin. It is here that the story fractures into horror. For what Medea did next defied even the gods. Some say she acted to spare her children from vengeance, others that she sought to wound Jason beyond repair. The motives blur. The act remains. She killed her sons, the flesh of her flesh, the last pure thing she had ever known. Euripides would later write that she looked upon them with tears in her eyes as she did it, whispering that they were better dead than left to the mercy of men. But perhaps that was the playwright's mercy, not hers. When Jason returned, it was to a city shrouded in ash. The palace burned, the king and princess reduced to charred remains, and his sons gone. What he found in their place was silence, and in that silence, Medea stood, radiant in her defiance. Above her, a chariot of dragons waited, a gift from Helios, her divine blood acknowledged at last. Jason shouted curses, begged the gods to strike her down, but the gods did not answer. They never do when their lessons are already clear. Medea ascended, her dragons hissing like thunderclouds, her face lit by the fire she had made. She did not look back, for what could she see but ruin? The wreckage of love, of loyalty, of her own humanity. Jason fell to his knees, surrounded by the echoes of a life he once believed he controlled. He had taken the golden fleece, he had commanded heroes, but in the end, he was only a man who underestimated the woman who gave him everything. The world called her monster. The poets called her witch, but in truth, Medea was something far older, the consequence of every promise broken, every sacrifice taken for granted. She was not merely avenging herself, she was restoring the balance. The city that once pitied her would never forget her silence. After the fire, after the screams had faded into ash, Corinth was left haunted by the woman who had smiled on her last day and said nothing. For Medea, silence was never absence, it was precision. It was the sound made by choice before it strikes. Jason's name, once sung in the temples of heroes, was now whispered in disgust. The man who had sought the favor of kings found himself cursed by the gods. He had thought that exile would strip Medea of her power. He had forgotten that power does not need place, only purpose. Medea had lost everything, her family, her country, her children, and in that emptiness, she became untouchable. What could be taken from someone who had already burned herself clean? Corinth buried its dead, but no one dared to speak against her. Some said she had fled north, others that she had vanished into the sky. A few claimed to have seen the shadow of her chariot streaking across the horizon at dusk, drawn by winged serpents that glimmered like bronze. The poets would later call it divine intervention, but it was perhaps something simpler, consequence returning to its source. And yet, the myth does not end there. After the blood and fire, after the vengeance fulfilled, Medea's story bends toward an unexpected direction, Athens. In one version, she arrives as a wanderer, weary but unbowed, her hands stained not by shame but by history. King Aegeus, childless and searching for a legacy, takes her as his wife. For a time, peace finds her again. The woman who had unmade kingdoms becomes a queen once more. She bears him a son, Medea, and the world almost believes that the storm has settled. But peace, for Medea, is never permanent. It is a fragile disguise, like calm water over deep current. When Aegeus's lost son Theseus returns to Athens, the old pattern repeats itself. Medea sees him not as blood, but as threat, to her child, to her stability, to her claim. Old instincts wake. She plots, she poisons, she fails. Banished again, she disappears into mythic geography. Some say she returned to Colchis, others that she wandered into a realm beyond time. Her endings are many, but her meaning is singular. Medea is not remembered for her exile or even for her crimes, but for her refusal to vanish. Each age rewrites her, each culture reinterprets her, yet her essence endures. A woman who will not accept silence as punishment. To the ancients, she was the embodiment of phobos, fear, the dread of intelligence ungoverned by men. To later poets, she became tragedy itself, the cost of passion without boundaries. To us, she might be something in between, a mirror. Because Medea's story is not only about magic or vengeance, but about what happens when love asks too much of a soul, and the soul finally says no. Jason's fate after her departure is almost merciful in its banality. Some versions say he lived in sorrow, sleeping beside the wreck of the Argo. One morning, the ship's rotting beam broke loose and crushed him. The hero slain not by gods or monsters, but by his own forgotten glory. It is a fitting symmetry. The man who built his legend on borrowed miracles dies beneath the ruins of them. Medea, meanwhile, transcends the grave. Whether she lived or not becomes irrelevant. What matters is that she remains. In every retelling, every whisper, every attempt to explain her away. Her power is no longer in her hands, but in the memory of those who fear her. She taught the ancient world a truth it could not bear, that destruction, in the hands of a woman, is indistinguishable from creation, that a fire can cleanse as much as it consumes, and that sometimes to choose oneself is to end everything else. Her silence was never surrender. It was decision, and when it came, the world burned, not because she was evil, but because she was awake. Long after the flames of Corinth cooled, Medea remained, not as flesh, but as echo. Her name drifted through centuries like smoke that refuses to dissipate. In every retelling, she changes shape, but never essence. To some, she is a warning, whispered to women. Do not love too fiercely, do not think too deeply, do not act too freely. To others, she is liberation, proof that even in a world ruled by men and gods, a woman could still wield her own story, even if that story ended in ruin. What endures is not her cruelty, but her clarity. Medea forces the listener to confront a question older than myth. What happens when devotion becomes debt? She gave everything, blood, kin, country, even her children. And in return, she was asked to disappear. Her vengeance was terrible, yes, but it was also logical. In every act of destruction, she was restoring the balance between giver and taker, between the seen and the silenced. Euripides, in his tragedy, made her both victim and philosopher. She stands on stage not as a hysterical woman but as a figure of intellect, dissecting love as one might dissect a corpse, with precision, not pity. Her pain is rational, her logic divine. She tells Jason, "I would rather face battle 3 times than give birth once." That line, spoken millennia ago, still ripples through the history of gender, echoing in the voices of those who have learned that creation too can wound. Modern readers see in Medea something the ancients feared to name: autonomy. She is the unyielding force of self-definition, the refusal to exist only as a reflection in someone else's story. Her crimes, unspeakable as they are, become metaphors for liberation from roles imposed by love, motherhood, or myth itself. The horror of Medea is not that she killed, it is that she decided. Even the gods, who once moved mortals like chess pieces, watched her and did nothing. When Helios sent his chariot of serpents, it was not rescue, it was recognition. A silent acknowledgement from the divine fire that another fire had been born on earth. In Medea, the sun saw itself. Some say she returned to Colchis to reclaim her father's throne. Some say she drifted beyond the mortal world, joining Circe among the islands where old magic sleeps. Perhaps she still exists, not as body, but as archetype, appearing wherever love and power collide. Every generation rediscovers her, in the woman who chooses knowledge over comfort, in the lover who refuses to stay silent, in the survivor who builds from her own wreckage. Medea's ashes are not the end. They are the soil from which stories grow. Stories that remind us that power has many forms, and that fear of a thinking woman is the oldest fear of all. Her silence, her intelligence, her fire, all survive. In the myths we still tell, even when we pretend not to see her in them. So when we speak her name, we do not summon a monster, we summon memory itself. The memory of a woman who loved beyond reason, who paid every price, who walked into the fire and did not vanish. Because Medea was never meant to be understood. She was meant to be remembered, terrible, beautiful, and unforgettable. And somewhere, perhaps just beyond the edge of the known world, the daughter of the sun still rides, her chariot cutting across the horizon like a scar of light. The air trembles with the faint hiss of serpents, and the sky burns gold as if the sun itself cannot forget her.